Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. You've sent us some really, let's say, interesting material to look at today.
Definitely interesting. We're focusing on a YouTube video, right? From the IT Collegiero Grafasi Investigations Italiano channel.
That's the one. It's titled 2206 IT Visha, C278 Toro 1 Telo, HAARP Ipnoperatore Esteno Federica Mertos Metodo Grafasi. Quite a mouthful.
Yeah. And our mission, basically, is to unpack the claims made in this video about the HAARP program.
Exactly. And these claims come through a pretty unique setup, an external hypnosis operator, and someone described as a telepathic support.
So we'll look at the fixed questions they asked, then the stuff that came up more freely under hypnosis, and importantly, we'll also touch on what the YouTube channel itself says about how reliable this kind of hypnotic info actually is.
Right. Okay, let's jump in. The first part used what they called a fixed protocol. Some set questions.
And the setup involved Federica Mertos as the hypnosis operator and Visha as the telepathic support. Crucially, they claim Visha didn't know the topic beforehand.
Interesting. So Vizia goes under hypnosis, and what's the first thing she perceives?
Well, connecting to program ARP, she immediately described seeing energy trails in the air.
Just like lines.
More specific than that, she said they were gold, shiny, kind of wave-like, and she got a sense they were coming from the left. That was the very first image.
Huh. Gold, shiny waves from the left. Okay, so building on that, where did the questions go next?
They asked about the objectives of this program ARP, and Visha connected those energy waves directly to modifying the atmosphere.
Modifying it how?
To cause climatic events, weather stuff.
Ah, okay, that lines up with a lot of the anxieties around HAARP, doesn't it? Weather control.
Exactly, and she got quite specific. She visualized scenarios.
Like what?
Like significant flooding, an alluvion, also a really strange storm misting sand and hail.
Sand and hail.
Yeah. And then separately, really big hail, like golf ball-sized hail.
Wow, okay. So from those images, the conclusion drawn in the session was
that the program ARP, is organized specifically to modify the atmosphere, purposefully.
right, which naturally leads to the next question. Did she perceive any connection to past events?
Yes, they asked about that. And Visha felt that, yes, some past events, she mentioned hurricanes and floods specifically, were generated by these same energy waves. She also described them as electromagnetic.
So not natural disasters in her view.
No, she had a distinct feeling they were organized, programmed, not like a normal storm that builds up, more like a switch was flipped.
That rapid shift from calm to destructive, I could see how that would feel unnatural.
It definitely feeds into the narrative of deliberate manipulation. But, we have to keep in mind this is information coming through hypnosis.
Good point. We'll get more into the channel's own take on that later.
Sure.
So after the past, did they look to the future?
They did. They brought up claims about projects linked to program ARP supposedly finishing in 2025.
And did Visha's perception align with that?
It seemed to. She perceived a program with, scheduled events designed to trigger these waves and their climate effects.
Scheduled events. And did she see anything else related to the source of these waves?
Yeah, she recalled a different, maybe earlier visualization, a big field filled with identical antennas, lots of them, arranged in rows.
Rows of antennas. That sounds very HAARP-like image-wise.
It does conjure that image, yeah. And she perceived these antennas weren't always on, but functioned selectively, based on the interests of whoever was controlling them.
Selective activation.
Yeah.
Okay, and what about further out, like 2030?
The focus for 2030 shifted towards anticipated experimentation. More testing, maybe.
Experimentation on what?
Concerns were raised about interactions with human minds, the ground, the sea.
Human minds. That's a step further.
Yeah. She perceived programs aimed at causing atmospheric problems, definitely. Also reaching a certain depth in the sea. And potentially influencing human minds, though she felt maybe not fully influencing, but observing effects on people, animals, the land.
That there was a limit, right? You mentioned something about the ground earlier.
Exactly. A key perception was that these waves, while affecting the upper atmosphere, didn't penetrate deep into the ground.
So according to this hypnotic perspective, HAARP wouldn't be causing earthquakes.
That was the conclusion drawn within the session, yeah. The waves hit the upper levels, maybe affecting a person's head and torso area, but not deep earth. Earthquakes were seen as separate, geological.
Interesting distinction. Okay, what about this mental-body interaction? That sounds pretty esoteric.
It does. Visha described observing the mental body, which in this context seems to mean a kind of non-physical aspect of a person being irradiated by a radio of ARP.
Irradiated, like hit with energy.
Sort of. But the interaction was only partial. She perceived something obstructing the waves, preventing a full connection or influence.
Okay. So moving even further into the metaphysical, did they ask about that plane?
They did. They asked about the program's purpose on the metaphysical level. Visha perceived entities involved in generating these weather events, working with humans, who she described as interfered humans.
Entities and interfered humans working together.
Yeah.
What was their goal, metaphysically speaking?
Interestingly, not just destruction. The word she used was organizing.
Organizing. What does that mean in this context?
Well, she gave a scenario. Imagine an entity influencing a human's mental body to activate the waves. Maybe to ensure clear skies for a military parade. Or a big speech by a head of state.
So manipulating weather for specific events, projecting power, or ensuring things go smoothly?
Exactly. That kind of targeted control, not just broad chaos. Though chaos was also part of it when they circled back to the physical plane goals.
Right. What were those physical goals again?
Back to the idea of causing destruction in certain countries or cities, leading to death, agricultural damage, destroying buildings, killing animals. Standard disaster stuff, but purposefully caused.
And the weather manipulation for specific events, like the parade example, came up again too.
Yes, that idea of projecting power or controlling the conditions for important moments was revisited.
So themes of destruction and control are really central here. Did they explore how these waves were supposedly created?
Yeah, they looked at it from a historical perspective within the hypnosis. Visha visualized a laboratory.
What kind of lab?
It had human engineers, scientists, physicists. They were studying and actually fabricating antennas.
The same antennas she saw in the field.
Maybe the precursors. These weren't described as huge, but as devices that could generate the waves by manipulating basic particles, electrons, protons, atoms, to penetrate the air.
So manipulating fundamental particles.
Okay.
Then who are the originators? The ones ultimately behind it, just those human scientists?
Well, according to Visha's perception, when they tried to, read the DNA of the originators, no, not solely human.
So the entities again.
Entities, yes. And also many described as hybrids, half human, half entity. And other humanoids, too.
Hybrids. Wow. Okay. And this lab, where was it supposed to be?
Underground, and possibly near Alaska. She got a vision of a snowy, cold surface above the lab.
Alaska again. So if non-human species or entities are involved, what are their motivations supposed to be? Why do all this?
Couple things came up. One was generating negative emotional states in humans. Psychosis, fear, despair. These low-frequency emotions were seen as a vital source, like food, for these entities.
The loosh concept, some call it. Emotional energy harvesting.
Something like that, yeah. And the other motivation was simpler, power. The desire to manipulate events, control outcomes, be in charge.
Fear, food, and power. Got it. What about the antennas themselves, the way they were arranged in that field, all in rows? Did that mean anything?
Apparently, yes. Visha perceived the linear alignment wasn't just practical, it was part of the programming. The antennas were numbered, arranged in rows, and this specific setup helped concentrate and direct the waves.
So the layout itself was functional part of the tech.
That was the perception. Deliberate design for directing the energy.
Okay. Now, they also talked about specific countries being targeted, right? In the past and potentially in the future.
Yes. For the past events, floods, sandstorms, hail, the perceived reason for hitting certain countries was financial, to bring those countries to their knees, essentially. Economic warfare via weather.
And looking ahead to 2025, any specific targets mentioned?
From an aerial view, in her visualization, she saw Italy, parts of America, and parts of Africa as being, let's say, more at risk.
Italy, America, Africa. Of course, that's incredibly vague and, as you said, based on a hypnotic vision.
Exactly. High level of speculation there. But then things get even more dramatic looking towards 2030, an apocalyptic scenario.
More apocalyptic than floods and giant hail.
Apparently so. She described something beyond those events, a red material mixed with rain-like water falling from the sky.
Red rain. What was it supposed to be?
Analyzing it within the hypnosis, it was perceived as a mix of solar rays, water, and a bit of sand. But it originated in the sky, generated by the waves.
Solar rays, water, sand, created by the waves. And the effect.
More than just flooding, it was described as having a toxic-like effect, something that lacerates plants, destroys agriculture. Really nasty stuff.
Yikes. Okay, let's circle back to the waves not affecting the ground deeply. Why the sea but not the soil. Was there more explanation?
The perception was it's about how the energy is programmed. It just doesn't penetrate that deep. It stays in the upper levels, atmosphere, surface water, affecting maybe the top part of a person.
So it reinforces the earlier point. No HAARP-induced earthquakes, according to this view.
Right. Earthquakes are geological. This ARP program is atmospheric and surface level, maybe shallow sea.
Got it. Final points from the session. Could these waves be predicted or stopped?
Prediction seemed difficult. Visha felt the generation was too rapid, following some programmed numerical sequence at high speed. Hard to see coming.
But stopping them, creating a shield.
That seemed more possible. She visualized devices, maybe like antennas, but in specific geometric shapes. Triangles, circles, pyramids.
Geometric shapes to counter the waves.
Yeah. These shapes could supposedly counteract the ARP wave. And the size of these counter devices would determine the area they could protect, like shielding a perimeter or a whole territory.
Fascinating. A potential defense, at least within this framework.
Okay.
So that covers the bulk of the hypnotic session itself. But the source video didn't stop there, did it?
Not at all. This is where it gets really crucial. The YouTube channel itself, Grafasti Investigations, adds a whole commentary section, basically questioning the reliability of using hypnosis like this for investigation.
So they present the session, but then offer a critique.
A strong critique. They argue that information coming through hypnosis is highly likely to be contaminated. They estimate a very high percentage of contamination, in fact.
Contaminated how?
Subjective interpretation, the person's own beliefs bleeding through, maybe even external influence. They use analogies like trying to communicate underwater or translating between languages, the message gets distorted.
So try to get objective facts from one session.
They basically say it's counterproductive, useless even, for gathering specific, reliable data because of this inherent distortion.
So why use hypnosis at all then? What's their perspective?
Their main use, they emphasize, is not for factual investigation. It's a tool to understand a client's personal, esoteric problems, their subconscious landscape, maybe past life stuff, entity interference affecting them. The information is a vehicle for that work.
Okay, so it's therapeutic or for personal exploration, not for finding out external truths.
Precisely. They say establishing any potentially reliable external information via hypnosis is incredibly difficult. It takes a huge effort. Many sessions, different people under hypnosis, different operators, looking for consistent patterns.
They give examples.
Yeah, like descriptions of greys or reptilians. If those details show up consistently across tons of sessions with people who supposedly don't know each other's accounts, then they might consider it potentially reliable data.
Maybe.
But even then, they're cautious. Very. They admit that even within a working group, there could be context contamination, shared ideas floating around. So their estimate for genuinely reliable info emerging this way, tiny, like 2 or 3%.
Wow, 2 to 3%. That's a huge caveat compared to just presenting Vish's session straight.
Absolutely. And they bring up other issues too, like needing subconscious authorization to get info about someone else. You can't just hypnotize someone and reliably investigate a third party.
And the risk of interference.
Big risk. Other entities could potentially manipulate the session, feed misinformation. It just adds another layer of unreliability for investigative purposes.
So their bottom line is?
Use hypnosis to work on the subject's issues. Don't use it like a detective tool for external events or people. They compare it to seeking info online. You trust official sources, not some random blog, right? A single hypnotic investigation is like the random blog.
That's a clear analogy. Do they ever try to investigate broader topics?
They do mention conducting ongoing cycles of regressive hypnosis, but for very narrow, specific topics. They gave the example of investigating pedophilia in the Catholic Church.
Why narrow?
The idea is that by focusing the scope really tightly across many sessions, you increase the chance of finding consistent, potentially reliable pieces of information. Then you try to piece those validated fragments together to build a bigger picture, very cautiously.
A much more painstaking, focused process.
Exactly. And they stress again, this investigative approach is totally different in technique and purpose from the hypnosis they use for individual client work.
Okay, so wrapping this up, the source gives us these two really contrasting perspectives packed together.
Yeah. On one side, you have this incredibly detailed narrative about HAARP, its objectives, its methods, entities, future predictions, all coming from Visha's hypnotic state.
And on the other side, you have the channel owner essentially saying, hold on, you absolutely cannot take this kind of hypnotic testimony as fact.
Okay.
highlighting all the reasons why it's likely unreliable for investigation.
For me, the real aha moment here is that explicit distinction they make. Using hypnosis for personal internal exploration versus using it to try and find external objective truth. They draw a very sharp line.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? When you consider these two completely different ways of viewing information gathered under hypnosis, what does that say about how we process information in general? How we form beliefs, especially about complex, hidden things like potential weather manipulation?
Yeah, and how much weight do you give to a vivid personal experience like Visha's visualizations versus a more detached critical analysis that emphasizes potential contamination and the need for widespread corroboration, especially with claims this extraordinary?
Definitely food for thought. What do you make of it all? It's worth pondering where that line is between experience, belief, and verifiable information.
Absolutely. Keep questioning, keep exploring.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.